Historical records indicate that Roman military expansion was not only a process of territorial acquisition, but also one of systematic social disruption. Among those most affected were elite women, queens, princesses, and noble figures, whose status did not protect them from the consequences of conquest. Their experiences, while less frequently preserved than those of male rulers, can be reconstructed through legal texts, military accounts, and scattered references in Roman historiography. These sources, though often shaped by Roman perspectives, reveal consistent patterns in how captive royal women were treated, managed, and ultimately absorbed into the structures of Roman power. Roman warfare operated within a framework that recognized conquest as both a military and economic enterprise. Victory brought land, wealth, and people. Enslavement was not incidental but integral to this system. Surviving documents suggest that captives were categorized according to perceived value, and high-status individuals were often treated differently from the general population. However, this differentiation did not imply protection in any modern sense. Instead, it reflected the utility such individuals could offer to the Roman state. Chroniclers noted that royal women captured during campaigns were frequently transported to Rome or other administrative centers. Their presence served multiple functions. They could be displayed in triumphal processions, a central ritual of Roman political life in which victorious generals publicly demonstrated their success. Contemporary accounts describe these processions as highly orchestrated events, where captives were presented alongside spoils of war, reinforcing the dominance of Rome over defeated territories. In this context, royal women symbolized the submission of entire political systems. The display of captive elites in triumphs was not merely symbolic, but also deeply political. Legal codes of the period reveal that triumphs required Senate approval, and the inclusion of prominent prisoners could strengthen a general's claim to honor. Surviving descriptions emphasize the contrast between the former status of these women and their current condition, underscoring the reversal of fortune that Roman victory imposed. This transformation was central to the narrative Rome constructed about itself, a state capable of subduing even the most powerful foreign rulers. After these public displays, the fate of captive royal women diverged depending on circumstances. Some were executed, particularly if they were associated with ongoing resistance or posed a symbolic threat. Others were retained as hostages. Hostage-taking was a well-established practice in Roman diplomacy, used to secure compliance from newly subjugated regions. In such cases, royal women could be held under supervision, their treatment reflecting both their importance and their vulnerability. Surviving documents suggest that hostages were often integrated into elite Roman households or kept under state oversight. While they might receive a degree of material comfort, their autonomy was severely restricted. Their presence in Rome functioned as a constant reminder to their native regions of the consequences of rebellion. This system of control relied not only on physical restraint, but also on psychological pressure, as the well-being of these individuals was directly tied to the behavior of their communities. Marriage was another mechanism through which captive royal women were incorporated into Roman society. In some cases, they were married to Roman officials or allied leaders. Such unions could serve diplomatic purposes, facilitating the integration of conquered territories into the Roman sphere. However, these arrangements were rarely voluntary. Legal texts indicate that the status of such women remained ambiguous, as their origins as captives complicated their position within Roman social hierarchies. The lived realities of these women varied widely, but certain patterns emerge from the available evidence. Contemporary accounts describe the dislocation they experienced, removed from their cultural and political contexts, and placed within a system that prioritized Roman interests. Language barriers, unfamiliar customs, and the loss of familial networks would have compounded their isolation. While some may have adapted over time, the structural constraints they faced remained significant. The Roman legal framework provides further insight into their condition. Laws governing slavery and citizenship delineated clear boundaries between Romans and non-Romans. Captive royal women, regardless of their previous status, were initially classified within the broader category of enslaved persons. This classification stripped them of legal rights and subjected them to the authority of their captors. In certain cases, manumission could alter their status, but such outcomes were contingent on the decisions of those in power. Chroniclers also noted instances where captive royal women influenced Roman society in more subtle ways. Their presence could introduce new cultural elements, from religious practices to artistic traditions. While these contributions were often absorbed and reinterpreted within a Roman framework, they indicate that the relationship between captor and captive was not entirely one-dimensional. Nonetheless, these influences did not mitigate the fundamental imbalance of power that defined their situation. The long-term effects of these practices extended beyond the individuals directly involved. The treatment of captive elites played a role in shaping the responses of other states to Roman expansion. Historical records suggest that knowledge of these outcomes influenced diplomatic strategies, with some rulers opting for negotiation or alliance in an effort to avoid similar fates for themselves and their families. In this sense, the experiences of captive royal women became part of a broader system of deterrence. At the same time, Roman authors often framed these events within moral or ideological narratives. Some accounts portray the captivity of foreign queens as evidence of Roman superiority, while others reflect a degree of ambivalence, acknowledging the harshness of such outcomes. These differing perspectives highlight the complexity of Roman attitudes toward power and conquest. While the state relied on these practices to maintain control, individual observers sometimes question their implications. Surviving documents also reveal the administrative processes involved in managing high-status captives. Records of property distribution, legal decrees, and correspondence indicate that their status required careful handling. Decisions regarding their treatment were not left solely to individual commanders, but often involved higher levels of authority. This oversight underscores the importance Rome placed on the symbolic and significance of these individuals. The absence of extensive first-person accounts from captive royal women presents a significant challenge for historical reconstruction. Their voices are largely filtered through Roman sources, which prioritize the perspectives of the victors. As a result, the emotional dimensions of their experiences must be inferred from indirect evidence. Nevertheless, the consistency of the patterns observed across multiple sources allows for a cautious understanding of their circumstances. Archaeological findings provide additional context. Burial sites, inscriptions, and material culture associated with individuals of foreign origin in Roman territories offer glimpses into their lives. In some cases, these remains suggest a degree of assimilation, while in others they indicate continued marginalization. The interpretation of such evidence remains subject to debate, but it contributes to a more nuanced picture of the outcomes of captivity. The documented fate of captive royal women during Roman military conquests reflects a system that combined pragmatism with display. Their treatment was shaped by a combination of political calculation, legal structures, and cultural attitudes. While individual experiences varied, the overarching framework remained consistent. Their identities were redefined within the context of Roman power, their previous status subordinated to the needs of the state. This process of transformation was not merely a byproduct of conquest, but a deliberate aspect of it. By controlling and repurposing the lives of these women, Rome reinforced its authority both domestically and abroad. The historical record, though incomplete, provides sufficient evidence to trace these patterns and to understand their significance within the broader context of Roman expansion. Surviving accounts suggest that the administrative handling of captive royal women did not end with their initial processing, but extended into long-term strategies of governance. Roman authorities understood that the presence of such individuals could be leveraged over years or even decades. Their continued existence within Roman control functioned as a living guarantee of compliance from subjugated regions. Inscriptions and correspondence from provincial administrations indicate that communication between Rome and local elites often referenced the status of hostages, reinforcing the connection between obedience and the safety or treatment of these captives. In some cases, the relocation of royal women was deliberately managed to limit their influence. Rather than being housed together or near communities from their place of origin, they were dispersed within Roman territories. This practice reduced the possibility of coordinated resistance or the preservation of political networks. Contemporary records describe how such individuals were placed under the supervision of Roman officials or integrated into households aligned with state interests. This dispersal reflects a broader Roman strategy of fragmenting opposition by isolating key figures from their support structures. Legal texts from the Roman period reveal a complex interaction between status, origin, and evolving identity. While initial classification as captives placed royal women within the legal category of enslaved persons, their treatment could diverge significantly from that of ordinary slaves. Jurists of the period acknowledged distinctions based on prior rank, particularly when such distinctions carried diplomatic implications. However, these acknowledgments did not translate into legal equality. Instead, they created a layered system in which certain privileges might be extended without altering the fundamental imbalance of authority. Manumission, when it occurred, introduced further complexity. Freed status did not restore previous sovereignty or political agency. Rather, it placed former captives within the framework of Roman society as dependents, often tied to their former captors through patron-client relationships. Legal codes indicate that such arrangements imposed obligations on both parties, though the balance of power remained firmly with the patron. For royal women, this transition could mean a shift from overt captivity to a more subtle form of dependency, in which autonomy was constrained by social and legal expectations. Marriage alliances continued to serve as a tool of integration, though the long-term outcomes of such unions varied. Epigraphic evidence suggests that some women retained markers of their origin, including names or titles that referenced their former status. These markers could function as both reminders of conquest and as elements of prestige within Roman society. At the same time, assimilation into Roman cultural norms often required the adoption of new identities, including language, dress, and religious practices. The process was not uniform, and surviving evidence indicates a spectrum of experiences ranging from partial integration to continued marginalization. The role of religion in this process provides additional insight into the lived realities of captive royal women. Roman religious practice was characterized by a degree of flexibility, allowing for the incorporation of foreign deities and rituals. In some instances, captive elites appear to have participated in or even contributed to this syncretism. Dedications and temple inscriptions point to the presence of foreign cults within Roman territories, occasionally linked to individuals of non-Roman origin. While such participation might suggest a degree of agency, it also reflects the broader context in which cultural expressions were mediated through Roman acceptance. Economic considerations also shaped the treatment of high-status captives. The Roman economy benefited from the labor of enslaved populations, but royal women were not typically assigned to productive labor in the same manner. Instead, their value lay in their symbolic and political utility. Nevertheless, they could be involved in the management of households or estates, particularly if they were integrated into elite environments. Surviving documents related to estate administration occasionally reference individuals of foreign origin in positions of responsibility, though the extent of their authority remains subject to interpretation. The psychological dimensions of captivity, while difficult to document directly, can be approached through indirect evidence. Contemporary writings occasionally allude to the emotional impact of displacement and loss among captives. References to mourning, adaptation, or resistance appear in various sources, though they are often filtered through Roman perspectives. These accounts suggest that the experience of captivity involved not only physical relocation, but also a profound reconfiguration of identity. For royal women accustomed to positions of influence, this transition would have entailed a significant alteration in their sense of self and their relationship to power. Instances of resistance, though less frequently recorded, are not entirely absent from the historical record. Some sources mention attempts to escape or acts of defiance, though such accounts are often brief and lack detail. The relative scarcity of these references may reflect both the effectiveness of Roman control mechanisms and the biases of the sources themselves. Roman authors tended to emphasize order and stability, potentially minimizing or omitting episodes that contradicted this narrative. Nevertheless, the possibility of resistance remains an important consideration in understanding the full scope of captive experiences. The treatment of children accompanying or born to captive royal women adds another layer to the analysis. Roman policy towards such individuals varied depending on circumstances, but surviving evidence suggests that they could be assimilated into Roman society more readily than their parents. Education, language acquisition, and socialization within Roman norms were key components of this process. In some cases, these individuals rose to positions of relative prominence, though their origins continued to shape their identity and opportunities. This generational dimension highlights the long-term implications of captivity for both individuals and communities. Diplomatic correspondence from the Roman period underscores the strategic importance of these practices. Letters exchanged between Roman authorities and foreign rulers often reference the status of hostages, including women of elite background. These communications reveal a calculated use of personal relationships as instruments of policy. The well-being of captives could be invoked to secure agreements, enforce treaties, or deter rebellion. This approach reflects a broader Roman tendency to intertwine personal and political considerations in the management of empire. The representation of captive royal women in Roman literature and art further illustrates their role within the cultural imagination of the empire. Sculptures, reliefs, and written accounts frequently depict them as embodiments of conquered territories. These representations often emphasize themes of submission and transformation, aligning with the ideological framework of Roman expansion. At the same time, some works convey a degree of ambiguity, hinting at the complexity of these individuals' experiences and the tensions inherent in their portrayal. Archaeological discoveries continue to contribute to this understanding. Objects associated with individuals of foreign origin, including jewelry, inscriptions, and funerary monuments, provide tangible evidence of their presence within Roman society. Analysis of these materials suggests varying degrees of cultural retention and adaptation. In some cases, elements of original identity are preserved alongside Roman influences, indicating a process of negotiation rather than complete assimilation. These findings support the view that the experiences of captive royal women cannot be reduced to a single narrative. The long-term consequences of these practices are evident in the broader patterns of Roman governance. By incorporating elements of conquered elites into its own structures, Rome created a system that combined coercion with selective integration. The fate of captive royal women exemplifies this approach, demonstrating how personal trajectories were shaped by the intersection of political necessity and institutional frameworks. Their experiences, while individually distinct, collectively illustrate the mechanisms through which Rome maintained control over diverse populations. Historical records indicate that these mechanisms were not static, but evolved over time in response to changing conditions. As the empire expanded and encountered new challenges, policies regarding captives and hostages were adjusted to reflect shifting priorities. Nevertheless, the underlying principles remained consistent. The use of human lives as instruments of statecraft and the transformation of former elites into components of Roman authority. The absence of comprehensive narratives from the perspective of these women continues to limit the scope of historical reconstruction. However, by examining the available evidence across multiple domains, legal, administrative, cultural, and archaeological, it is possible to assemble a coherent picture of their circumstances. This picture reveals a system that was at once methodical and adaptive, capable of absorbing and redefining individuals in ways that serve the interests of the Roman state. As the evidence accumulates, the documented fate of captive royal women emerges not as a series of isolated, but as a structured aspect of Roman imperial practice. Their lives, shaped by forces beyond their control, provide insight into the functioning of a system that extended its reach through both visible and more subtle forms of domination. Contemporary accounts suggest that as Roman power matured into a more stable imperial system, the treatment of captive royal women became increasingly formalized within broader administrative practices. What earlier campaigns may have handled through immediate military discretion gradually shifted into predictable procedures governed by precedent, senatorial oversight, and evolving imperial policy. Surviving legal references and narrative histories indicate that by the late Republic and early imperial periods, the fate of high-status captives was less a matter of improvisation and more a component of established statecraft. In this later framework, the symbolic importance of royal women persisted, but their role was increasingly embedded within the machinery of empire rather than the spectacle of individual triumphs alone. Triumphs themselves continued to occur, though their frequency and political meaning changed as imperial authority consolidated under centralized rule. When captive elites were still displayed, they functioned less as personal trophies of generals and more as representations of Rome's institutional dominance. Chroniclers noted that the imagery of conquered nobility, including women of royal lineage, reinforced the perception of Rome as an inevitable and orderly power. Administrative records from provincial governance suggest that the management of such captives often intersected with taxation systems, property redistribution, and diplomatic correspondence. Their maintenance required resources, and those resources were drawn from the imperial structure itself. This created a paradox in which individuals taken as symbols of conquest also became logistical responsibilities of the state. The imperial bureaucracy, increasingly sophisticated over time, handled these matters through appointed officials whose duties included supervision, allocation of housing, and coordination with elite households. Legal codes of the imperial period reflect a growing concern with categorization and regulation. Distinctions between enslaved persons, freed individuals, and foreign elites under Roman control became more carefully defined. Yet even within this structured system, royal women occupied an ambiguous space. Their prior status could grant them certain informal considerations, but these did not override the foundational legal reality of Roman authority. Juristic writings emphasize that identity in Roman law was ultimately subordinate to legal classification within the empire, not inherited rank from outside it. In some instances, imperial policy allowed for selective restoration of dignity, particularly when it served diplomatic objectives. Surviving diplomatic correspondence indicates that the release or favorable treatment of high-status captives could be used to secure alliances or stabilize frontier regions. However, such gestures were strategic rather than restorative. The return of a captive royal woman to her homeland, when it occurred, was typically conditioned on political alignment with Rome and did not necessarily restore previous sovereignty in full form. Instead, it often reflected a new political reality shaped by Roman oversight. Cultural integration continued to play a significant role in shaping long-term outcomes. In elite Roman households, foreign noblewomen could be exposed to education systems, philosophical instruction, and domestic administrative roles. This exposure did not erase their origins, but often recontextualized them within Roman cultural frameworks. Epigraphic evidence from tomb inscriptions and household dedications suggests that identity in such cases could become layered, combining references to former status with indicators of Roman affiliation. These hybrid identities illustrate the adaptive nature of imperial society, though always within the boundaries of Roman authority.